Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Association for Project Management session, looking at the question of why data matters. And you've got a very quick question on your screen there, a slider poll, just a very simple question, trying to understand what your thoughts are on data as we kick off the session. Please do take a minute to fill that in, and we'll ask you the same question at the end, just to see if your perspective's changed at all. So first of all, just a thank you for joining. You'll all be on mute throughout the session, but please do post questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll run through these after the presentation from our guests today. So we're joined by three speakers. We'll be looking at the question of why data matters. So first of all, Naomi's joining us as Professor of Complex Program Management at University of Warwick. We're also joined by Sebastian with the N Plan, who look at providing data-driven insights to manage project risks more effectively. And then finally, we're also joined by Martin Paver, which is the CEO and founder of Projecting Success, which looks at providing advanced project data analytics services. So we're going to pick their brains throughout the session, and we do trust it's a useful opportunity for you as well. So just to remind you as well, please do post questions throughout the session. I'm sure the panelists will be more than happy to answer either during the session or after. So without further ado, I kind of pose the question to our three guests. Why, as project professionals, should we value data in our day-to-day roles, and why does it matter? So Naomi, do you want to tackle that question first?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Marius. So Marius has given us a deceptively simple question and 10 minutes in which to answer it. So I'm going to do my very best. Next slide, please, Rob. So you should never believe anything until you know the provenance of the person saying it. So I'm just going to briefly introduce a little bit about Warwick, a little bit about me, and what I've been doing in the field of project data analytics before I actually get to the meat of the question. So this is me, Professor of Complex Program Management at WMG University of Warwick. WMG, formerly known as Warwick Manufacturing Group, but we've grown beyond that label, has over a decade of tailored project management education at every level within APM qualifications. We're even now thinking about how we work with chartership as well. And we've set up tailored project management and project delivery programs with companies like Arup, JLR and GE Aviation. We've also got a very long history in degree apprenticeships. So we run degree apprenticeships in digital technologies and in data analytics. And personally, I'm a fairly new recruit to Warwick, just been there for a year, most of the time spent from working from my desk like everybody else, I think, since the beginning of lockdown. And I founded a group called Project Praxis, and the whole idea of this research group is that it does research that's oven ready. So it looks into stuff that can immediately be taken out by practitioners and used to improve project delivery. And we work with a wide variety of stakeholders, Sellafield, Nuclear Decommissioning Agency, just looking at my crib list here, full stack developers. We work with global consultancies. I've been doing some work with Accenture on project data delivery. We work with government, infrastructure and projects authority, so I'm involved with Project X there, and with the APM and MPA. And next slide, please, Rob. And particularly in terms of project data analytics, then we've got a wide remit within Project Practice. We're doing a lot of work about eliminating unnecessary complexity. We're doing a lot of work about agility and a lot of work about project data analytics. I'm a member of the APM Project Data Analytics Advisory Group, founder member of the Project Data Analytics Research Network, which has brought together Manchester and Sheffield and Southampton. I look after Project X Theme C data. So Project X is a university project working with Southampton and with Said Oxford and funded by ESRC, the government, and working with the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. I've set up a British Academy of Management, which is a particular conference track all around data analytics. Got involved, as I said, with Accenture on data-driven transformation of projects. Did a recent report for the APM, which I really recommend you download. You just need to Google Project Data Analytics State of the Art and you'll get there. I do a lot of research work on predicting projects' performance in the context of both estimating and benchmarking, and we're about to do a really big Delphi event on the barriers and enablers of project data analytics with some really interesting organisations across large infrastructure like HS2, TfL, Network Rail, Highways England. So that's my background. So now actually answering the question. Rob, next slide please. So project data has always been with us, always, forever, ever and ever. So I've just drawn a picture of a Gantt chart there because Henry Gantt, 1919, in his book, can't remember what it was, Organisation and Work or something, came up with this idea of let's just simply have activities and the time they take and, the planned time they take and the actual time they take. And we therefore have been looking at this kind of data since we were doing projects, really. So the question isn't really why is data important to projects? What can we do about it? It's more that can we now do different things with data? And do we have more data to do different things with? And we can, at this point, have the creative ability then to use data in much better ways. Let's hold on to that thought of now, though, because we have actually had that capability for quite a while. I read a really interesting paper all about how to use AI in projects and looked at the data of it, and it was 1987. So we've had these ideas for a while, and I would argue we've actually had the capabilities as well. Whether we've used them is another matter. Next slide, please, Rob. So as part of the review that we undertook with the APM, excuse me for a moment, I'm just going to do this. We looked at where we were now, and when we looked across organisations, so we asked two very simple questions. Where are you with project data analytics now and what you will be doing next? And we asked this question to a wide variety of what we would call practitioners and experts. So data analytics, SMEs, conventional project control consultancies, project management control user organisations. And came up with these kind of two 4x4 matrix with two elements on each side that give us some really interesting insights into where we are. So we can split up into predictive analytics and descriptive analytics, and across projects in one organisation and across projects in many organisations. So currently where we are, and those green and yellow and, well, it's not quite red, it's more orange, kind of give us an idea of the maturity. Descriptive analytics within your own project is happening in a lot of organisations. So now, when we say now, we've got Quick View, we've got Power BI, we can do all sorts of cutting and juxtaposing data in ways that are useful. And there's lots of evidence to show that that adoption actually supports superior programme and project delivery, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But there's a lot of barriers in those areas as well. Classic one, geeks versus business. I guess I fall onto the geeks sort of end of the spectrum, but I'm well aware that not everybody who's listening on this call is going to be as absolutely delighted and intrigued by project data analytics and machine learning and things like that that I am. And I have to convince people that those kind of tools and techniques do have advantages. In terms of predictive analytics, across organisations and descriptive analytics across organisations, we are doing that. We have done that for very many years, back to this idea that data has always been useful because there's always been a kind of traditional benchmarking comparison going on. In places like Turner and Townsend in infrastructure projects, organisations like Ed Merrow's IPA organisation, What's really happening in limited places, and I know people on this call have done this and will be able to talk about this, is this idea of predictive analytics. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's where my research experience lies, and I think I've got some useful insights perhaps to share with you in that context. Next slide, please, Rob. So I alluded to the fact that there are benefits that you can gain from this. Eyes on the prize. So data matters because we can deliver projects better because of it. And there's a lot of kind of survey evidence to support this then. There's not this year's logical questionnaire, which I'm sure some of you have completed, but I don't think we've seen the results of yet, but certainly last year's talked very clearly about how a mature use of data was an indicator of a superior delivery performance. And the work that I did with Accenture, particularly in large infrastructure organisations, showed a return on investment bottom line improvement if this kind of data analytics strategy was pursued. And we can also see that at an individual level. And I've very kindly, with the courtesy of the Oakland Group, who are one of these full stack developers that I work with, included some results from their kind of prototype with a client that they worked with. And they have been using predictive analytics. And as you can see in the kind of big bubble up there, 80% improvement on 9-month forecast accuracy. So they were able to build a predictive model that actually forecast 82% better than project managers about whether they would have overspend or underspend, which in some particular circumstances, underspend is as bad as overspend, especially when you're thinking about a program and you could have used that money usefully elsewhere. And additionally then, they showed 13% of portfolio value that was kind of amenable to improvement through the use of these kind of models. So if we're saying eyes on the prize, it's definitely worth it. Data can be used. But there are a whole host of problems in terms of the geeks business divide. Talked about that already, in terms of data maturity, in terms of attitudes to data, whether we take it seriously or if we don't, then we can't do any of this great stuff that we're talking about because of the old maxim, garbage in, garbage out, that we don't have an appropriately free, and I know that's a difficult concept when we're talking about sharing data to get into. And from the point of view of an academic, there's just a lot of basic statistical challenges that we haven't actually solved in order to be able to do this kind of prediction. And I'm not really sure actually that we really know what data we need to make projects decisions better. So there's a lot of provisos there. Briefly though, as a kind of a little bit more feel for what we've been doing to convince you. Rob, next slide please. So this is actually now particularly looking at some work that we did here at Warwick. It was building a predictive capability for estimating. So we were looking at, I can't tell you because of the NDA agreement, but multinational corporations in pharma chem and automotive manufacturing. And we were looking at particular improvement projects. And we were trying to tell them or help them predict what made a project likely to give a good estimate. So why were some projects being estimated very badly and some well? And we came up with a particular importance ranking then. Interestingly, we couldn't build a predictive model, but we could tell you what was important. And those are the sort of things that you can see there. Surprise, surprise, almost really. The factor of the greatest importance was, interestingly, the total number of projects that the owning owner owns. So the more they owned, the better they got, actually. Interesting. So you are able to give that kind of insight. So if you said, Naomi, what could you do better with my data now? I can say, well, I can tell you these kind of things that are affecting your estimate performance, which are going to be useful in the way that you deliver. And Rob, skip very quickly over the next slide, please, because I realise that I am running out of time. Project data maturity models, but it depends on the maturity of your data. So, ladies and gentlemen, final response to Marius then, and can I have the next slide, please, Rob? I would argue that data really does matter, because I hope in this very brief 10 minutes what I have shown you is that data can help you make better delivery decisions. But I just want to put a proviso and a rider on that, that you do need good quality data and the right tools to do that. Thanks very much, Marius.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Naomi. Really useful. And I love the kind of challenge of, the data's always been there, how can we use it differently? So thank you for that. Kind of posing the same question to Seb, who's joining us from NPlan. From your perspective, why does data matter?
Yeah, hi Marius, and nice to meet everybody. My name's Seb, and I work in the major accounts at NPlan. So I will answer that question. Before I go into it, I'll introduce who we are at NPlan and set the scene as to the problem we see in people not utilising data, and then how we utilise that data at NPlan and why it matters. So to start with, NPlan, we are data-driven risk analysis and assurance. Of course, risk analysis and assurance exists in the construction industry already, but it's subjective and human-driven. So being data-driven, it allows us to have unbiased, actionable insights on projects. So a way of viewing our approach to being data-driven is we are a method of reducing the unknown risks in a construction project. And it's the past data that allows us to do this, which I will introduce to you guys. Just to set the scene, I'll outline kind of the problem in the industry that we saw and why we came about at NPlan. So if you jump onto the next slide, please, Rob, and I'll start with that. So you'll all be very familiar, of course, with the Gantt chart in front of us. And as you know, it's incredibly difficult to deliver on the original plan for a construction project. Why is that? Well, it's the complexity, the different teams involved, the changing in delivery through the lifespan of that project. One of our global partners is McKinsey, and they have an interesting reports out there stating that 98% of mega projects are delayed. And that's a really scary number. And one of the reasons we see that number being so high is if you jump onto the next slide, Rob, and I will just highlight one of the big issues we have is learning from mistakes in the construction industry is really hard. So one of our clients, Shell, they have lessons learned at the end of each project, and I know that lots of people do, but if you have a project spanning over 4 years with lots of different teams, how many of those, the things that didn't go to plan or were deemed mistakes, get correctly picked up and then correctly and willingly learned from at the end of those projects? And the answer is not enough. And that leads into a really a big problem that we see and an importance in past data is without past data, there is an issue with human bias. So if I do pick up an issue on my last project, and let's say that reinforcement works didn't go to plan, and going into my next project, due to the relative bias, I will put greater emphasis on reinforcement works, and therefore that will skew my risk. You also have optimism bias, so people by nature are optimistic, and that means that when it comes to me looking at a project, I will be optimistic in the delivery of that and the specific activities. So jumping on to the next slide, please, Rob. What we have done at NPlan is we built artificial intelligence that learns from how projects were planned to how projects were executed. So what we do is we take past schedules, so typically whether that be downloading them in XCR format from P6, or we feed that into the NPlan machine learning engine. And so far to date at NPlan, we have learned from the largest set of construction programs in the world through existing clients like Shell, Network Rail, Skanska, Google, Kia, BAM, and so forth, whose schedules we have fed into NPlan. We fine-tune a model for each client, but the NPlan model has learned from all of the schedules that have gone through, and it is then able to give you outputs for your project. So you will then load a baseline schedule and the upcoming schedules through NPlan. It will tell you the end date, the criticality, durations, uncertainty, and in layman's terms, how long is your project going to take? What are the risks, and more importantly, more importantly, how can you mitigate those risks, and then identify ways that you can speed up that project and hit the deadlines that are in place. And it's really important to point out, so what this allows us to do, it's interesting, Naomi mentioned kind of having the right tools to utilize past data, and that's exactly what kind of M-Plan is doing for people. And what we do is by feeding in schedules, M-Plan learns activity level. So it takes a bottom-up approach. So rather than compare two metro systems, it will take a bottom-up approach to look at the individual activities, taking thousands of inquiries into each activity, what came before, what came after, and tons of different information into those to then build up a picture for that project and accurately forecast. So M-Plan isn't benchmarking. We are learning from all the activities we have seen to then accurately forecast on the activities we then put through the M-Plan engine. A useful way that the maths behind artificial intelligence and machine learning is incredibly technical. I'm very happy to get into a conversation outside of today with anyone that's interested. But a useful way that it was explained to me when I started at M-Plan was the M-Plan machine learning engine is like an incredibly intelligent person that forgets nothing and isn't impacted by bias. So out of the 600,000 plus projects that have gone through M-Plan, it remembers all of this. It doesn't suffer from the subjective issues and biases that we find from the human risk analysis and assurance. I've tried to explain as best I can in one slide there as to how M-Plan works. I'll jump into a bit more detail, conscious of the time that we have today. But next slide, please, Rob. So one of the things that obviously what we're doing is that the main competitor to M-Plan, or if you would call it that, is the way that things are currently done in the industry. So currently, people use different risk analysis tools like Paver risk analysis and a number of others. And what you're doing there is you are inputting subjective information to drive your outputs. And an interesting story here. So our head of risk at M-Plan is a lady called Georgia Stillwell, who joined us from Network Rail, who now use us on a number of projects across the UK. She came over to M-Plan because she said prior to hearing about us, she had spent 90% of her time building complex risk analysis using tools like Paver risk analysis, and she then spent 10% of her time doing something about that risk. What we do at M-Plan is we flip that on its head. Because we are data driven and objective, we can create risk analysis very quickly, and therefore people can spend 10% of their time building risk analysis and 90% of their time doing something about that. More importantly, that 90%, you're doing something about objective data driven risk analysis. So that's far more accurate than the traditional way of doing it. So that's why Georgia came on board at M-Plan and why we're doing the work we are with Network Rail at the moment. And a good way to look at that is M-Plan is allowing computers to do what they do best, and that is process information and learn from data. Therefore, giving people more time to do what they do best, and that's use their initiative and take action. So when we work with clients, we very much go into a collaborative approach to say, right, well, let's let the data work for you and drive this learning and accurate forecasting, and then allowing people more time to know where to focus and focus on what actions they need to take. Next slide, please, Rob. So the last, and I thought this was quite cool to put in there, so slightly off topic, but I've kind of introduced technology into this, and obviously the importance of technology when it comes to embracing past data and making sure that we're using past data correctly, and that's artificial intelligence and more specifically machine learning. And these were two cool articles that I read recently around the data experts in football being their best signings and how they're now using past football data to correctly forecast when injuries are going to happen. And then you also have, I've included links on here for anyone that is interested, and if these slides are shared after, there's another one where they've written a new Nirvana song, And what they've done is, through machine learning, they have fed in the past Nirvana songs, and it has learned to then create a new Nirvana song. And it shows how machine learning is using this past data across different industries, and to then accurately forecast kind of future, whether it's industries or future songs. And that's what we are doing at Mplan, is why data matters so much now, is because there's this issue in the industry where projects are being delayed through the reasons that we mentioned. So using past data, we can make sure that we can accurately deliver on projects in the construction industry. So that is to answer Marius's question there.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Really useful insight, and it's so true that we can underestimate the impact of unconscious bias when it comes to managing a project. They're really useful. Thank you. And finally, but not least, Martin, posing the same question to you about why data matters. Should I hand over?
Thanks a lot, Marius. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm Martin Paver. So, in terms of background, I'm a chartered project manager and a chartered engineer. I've run some big projects in my time. So I've led a $1 billion project and a $10 billion PMO as well. So really understand about project delivery and project management. So in terms of this talk, right, slightly different to the two. It's more about these sort of overall concept about why data matters. This slide in front of you now is something that I got from Crossrail back in 2018. It was August 2018, and they came along to the Project Data Analytics meetup, which is about 7,500 people now involved, sort of talking about their data. And it's a bit of a killer slide for me because it really brought it home. So basically all the data in red there is the data which comes out the back of the program. It's all packaged together and it's passed across to Rail for London, and it's all used for the management of the railway. In terms of the stuff in blue, it's used for building the railway. And if you think about Crossrail, it's a once through program, and as soon as Crossrail's finished, it turns into the Elizabeth line, and then Crossrail just dissipates as a vehicle because it's a project organisation. So all those people disappear to Australia and various parts of the world, you know, they go back to their normal jobs. So all that data in blue, if you just press again for me, Rob, is a big exhaust plume that comes out the back of the project. The problem is at the moment, we're not really capturing this data in an appropriate format so we can do something with it. So with Mplan systems, it's talking about understanding risk, and you can understand the predisposition to variance from a schedule, but you can't necessarily understand the risk, because the risk is captured in the risk registers, or it's captured in terms of uncertainty, associated with certain events that you've got happening, which might be associated with your assumptions, etc. So we need a connected data set, and it's that connected data set that starts to drive these insights. So if you could press again for me. So fundamentally what we're trying to do is to leverage all of this past experience so we can start to drive future project experience. So we can use that to start to drive up delivery productivity and certainty. Next slide. So in terms of where we are today, most organizations are looking backwards in terms of descriptive analytics. So that's talking about what happens, that's where your dashboards are, etc. And where we want to be in the future, if you press again, Rob, is moving into this space. So that's where we want to be, and it starts to predict what's going to happen next. And it's not taking that as a predetermined destiny. It's now saying through prescriptive analytics, what can we do to change that future? And if you press again, Rob. So it's driven by data. And the problem is with a lot of that data, it's not aligned to our use cases. And those use cases are basically the problems that we want to answer in the future. And a lot of those problems we've not thought through yet, like for instance, what's going to go wrong next week? What's the best way of investing our continuous, etc. That needs to be driven by lots of data volumes and data quality, etc. And we can start to drive that up. So I think that's why we need a lot of data, and that's why data matters. So if you press again for me, please, Rob. So if you think about human beings, each of us are predisposed to certain illnesses. We're sort of predisposed to cancer, diabetes, all these different things. We know that because we've done loads of research into it. We understand DNA, we understand lifestyle factors, etc. And the question is, does the same apply to projects? And I think, if you press the next slide again for Rob. If you look at this, so this is a piece of research that Oxford Side Business School did. They've got a database of 12,000 projects. And from that, you can see that there's certain types of projects have got a small predisposition to cost overrun and schedule overrun, and some have got a massive predisposition. All that's telling us at a benchmark level is that one type of project is a lot more sort of variable than another type of project, but it doesn't tell us why. And that's contained in things like the project level documentation, the work breakdown structure, conditions of the project, the team dynamics, all of that sort of thing. And that's contained in data. So we can use the data and we can start to understand which of these factors have got the greatest influence on variance. Next slide. So the challenges in terms of project delivery, and this is our own fault as well, because in the body of knowledge, we state every project is different. Because every project's different, we often think we got nothing to learn from the previous project. So every project is different in terms of the exact specification of that project, but at a functional level, they've got a high degree of certainty. So that's in terms of some of the procurement challenges that you faced. The integration challenges, design, risks, delays, cost growth, compensation events. I could go on and on and on. And the question is, for data science, are there patterns in this data? And there are, and that's been demonstrated to you today. So M-Plan's got capabilities. There's lots of people out there with capabilities, and some of these capabilities are actually free. So you can download Python scripts, and you can start to get inside of your data and start to look for those patterns in your data. And next slide. So what we're trying to do in terms of project data analytics, we're trying to move from looking backwards in terms of the development of this rear view mirror and start to look forwards in terms of crystal ball. And if you press again for me, Rob. And the challenge to all of you is, where would you rather your career be? And I think in PMOs, in project management, any project delivery roles in the future, if you can move into the crystal ball space where you can start to anticipate delay and you can start to anticipate where things are going to go wrong on a project, you bring in a lot more value. If you bring in a lot more value, you're a lot more valuable. So I think this is going to start to really drive careers. If you press again for me, Rob. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So we run something called Project Hack. So it's a community hackathon that we held every sort of 2 months now. It's a weekend hackathon and a weekday hackathon. So we're starting to alternate them now. It was just weekends last year. So we get about 100 people turning up. We get people from the Project Data Analytics Academy, and we get people from universities and just general public come along as well. M-Plan's kindly sponsored it as well, so they come along and bring some of their guys and bring some of their data as well. So it's a community event where we try and open up people's minds to the art of the possible. So what Jacobs did, they brought a load of anonymized data on their projects and said, which of these projects is likely to make a loss? And can we predict that 6 months out? And in 2 days, right, this is just a weekend hackathon, in 2 days, that's the results we got. So the accuracy of the model was about 83%. And the feedback there is from a chap from Jacobs who was really chuffed with the results in a weekend. So if we can do this stuff in 2 days, just imagine what we can do when we really start to apply a lot of analytics to it. The next slide, please, Rob. So something else we did, so this was another couple of days, we worked with Baker Hughes. So one of their chaps is on the academy, he's a senior program manager, and he brought a load of data to us. So there's some numbers there, top left, which it's about 100 projects, 96,000 activities, etc. He said to us, in terms of those activities, we've got loads of estimates that's coming out of the planners. Can we go back and validate if those estimates are appropriate or not? He then said to us, can you tell us which of those activities are more predisposed to variance? And can you also tell us which departments are most at fault? So a team of 6 people cracked this problem in 2 days, and they came back with a machine learning model, and they start to predict at an activity level what the outturn would be per activity. And that's pretty transformational stuff, and you can achieve that in a couple of days. So does data matter? Yes, it does. Next slide, please, Rob. In terms of the project data analytics sort of meetup as well, the community event, we held one some time ago. We talked about what's the impact of project data analytics on project control. So it's just one case study. So we ran an event with the president of the APM, and this is what came up. So 40% of people thought it's a major change, 32% who say it's a very different role, and 19% of people are saying if I don't keep up with this, I will personally become obsolete. And there's only 7% of people who think it's a minor tweak, and 1% of people think there's no difference. So 8% of people think this is going to be small, and everybody else thinks it's going to be a major change, or it's going to lead to their personal obsolescence. So that's why data matters. We've all got to keep up with this stuff. My final slide, Rob. So come and find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of things on LinkedIn. We also run a Project Data Academy. So that's all funded by government. So if you're a big company, it's paid for through your apprenticeship levy. And if you're a smaller company, then government picks up 95% of the bill. So please get in touch with my colleague Vicky, or reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're interested in that. We've got people from places like the NHS, Environment Agency, Highways England, Jacobs, ACOM, Mace, Kia, Balfour Beatty, etc. We've got loads and loads of different companies involved in it, about 40 companies now. And so most importantly, the thing I'd like to leave you with is we've got a task force. So it's the Project Data Analytics Task Force that brings a load of people together. So we've got Andy Murray from the Major Projects Authority. We've got people from Sir Robert McAlpine, people from the Environment Agency, from the NDA as well, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. And basically, we've got a vision to improve project delivery performance tenfold. And that's from that baseline data from Oxford University that I showed you before. And what that baseline data is telling us is that 1 in 200 projects is delivering so as per its sanction. And its sanction says, if you give me this amount of money, I will deliver my project in this time scale with this amount of benefit. There's only 1 in 200 projects is achieving that from Oxford University's data set. So that's why I believe that data matters. So please get involved in some of these things that we're working on. Please get involved in the community events. All of our community events we do in partnership with the APM as well, so please get involved in all of them. So that's it for me, Marius. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Martin, and completely agree. The role of data will becoming more and more essential as we progress into the project world. So we've got about 20 minutes or so left to answer some of the questions that colleagues who joined this call posted, and a few really good questions come through already, so thank you for that. Please do keep sending them. If we don't get a chance to answer them during the call, we'll make sure we get in touch with you afterwards. So just the first question I'd like to post to Naomi. So it's looking at, I guess the title can be a bit deceiving, so kind of complex programs. And do you think the role of data is more relevant for complex programs, or is there a benefit or even a place for it in smaller projects, and why?
So, Marius, you'll be very pleased to hear that when it comes to using data, size and complexity doesn't matter. So what we are really looking at is a capability for projects and programs of all sizes to benefit from this. Size doesn't matter, maturity does, data maturity. And if you look at, I was really interested in terms of what Martin was saying in terms of being able to build quickly this machine learning estimating model, because that's the kind of activity that we were actually doing research into as well. And you can build a model very quickly, but it took us 3 months to get the data into the right format for that, not because we hadn't got access to the tools, because the inherent maturity was really poor. And we spent so much time trying to get different parts of the organisation to agree on what the start definition was for an actual project start, and to eliminate rogue projects which were put in for reasons that so to kind of summarise what you're saying, I think the eyes on the prize, we can do some amazing things with data. And we can do that in large organisations and small organisations. And actually, in small organisations, you're more likely to be able to build reliable models. I mean, bear in mind now, it's not, machine learning is a bit of a fancy term. It's actually unlicensed statistics. Okay, that's the kind of territory we're in with what we're actually doing here. But in a smaller company, a smaller organisation, small number of projects, you're likely to build better and more predictive models. But you won't be able to do any of that or benefit from anything that Sebastian or Martin or I have been talking about if you've got fundamentally immature data. So I think if people are listening on this, one of the first things they really need to do is go away and think about that. Now, not everybody in the world is a construction project using Primavera. We're still dealing with an awful lot of bespoke systems which have eccentric and idiosyncratic interpretations within them. So my answer is size doesn't matter, data maturity does.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. And Phil, hopefully that answers your question. Just another question from Chloe, which is for yourself, Seb. It's kind of looking at the limitations of data, I guess in your context when it comes to managing risks. What do you think are the limitations, and do you think they will be overcome?
I guess in terms of limitations, in terms of a company's limitations, in terms of the amount of data you have, is that what the question's referring to?
I think it's more, I guess, linking with your unconscious bias pieces. If you're focusing on using data to drive your decisions, what are some of the risks of having that approach?
It's a good question, and so I would say there aren't risks in taking that approach, because once you have kind of models trained and the data is there, the important thing to point out is that the model isn't driving your decisions, so to speak. It's highlighting the risks and what you need to be aware of. The decisions are still very much driven by the individuals that are involved in those projects. So we're not saying that past data can be used to kind of streamline things and take away from jobs. It's something that can make the system more efficient. So we can tell people by using past data, listen, this is what's going to go on your project. This is where you need to focus. There's still a big collaboration on, okay, so specifically for this project in Nigeria, let's say, what might be the best action to take, and then take that scenario approach. I don't believe there are any limitations, which is one of the exciting things in terms of that. But the only caveat is that it's you have to be working with collaborative people that embrace this new way of doing things, and focus obviously on the fact that they have to be involved in these decision makings too. So it won't tell you what you have to do specifically on an action level. It will tell you the risks that you need to take action on.
Brilliant, thanks for that. No, that was useful, Chloe. The next one, probably focusing more on some of your points, Martin, and it's looking at upskilling and that side of things. So do you think using data in projects requires a specialist to join the project, or is it reasonable to expect current project professionals to upskill to the right level of competency? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a difficult question, that, actually, Marius. It's a good question. And it's all about data maturity, really. If you've got loads and loads and loads of data, in SEBS type space, then what you probably need is PhD level type capabilities, which SEB's got as sort of part of MPlan, and you use those and you start to find these micro patterns in your data, right? Most companies have not got that because they're not that mature, they don't have those volumes of data. So it works for your massive projects and if you've got a lot of them. In terms of where most organisations are at the moment, I'm starting to see in a couple of organisations this starting to fragment, right? So there's an organisation that has just employed 14 Power BI people, so Power BI jockeys. Now, if you think about that, what they're going to start to do, they're going to start to do all your project dashboards. They're going to start to do your reporting and looking for patterns in your data. So if they're looking for patterns in that data, what is your project controls people going to do, your benefits people going to do in the future? So it starts to nibble away at their jobs. And it starts to nibble away until we lose the critical mass, right? So that's one approach, is to build a big centralized team of these data people. And a second approach is to say, what's more important for us is not a tool jockey, but it's somebody with domain expertise who really understands project delivery, who can start to use some of these new tools. And that's where we need to be, because there's a lot of sort of expertise in terms of our professionals, which we need to bring out through the use of these tool sets. So basically, if we can start to upskill people in project data analytics, and we can get them to understand the art of the possible, and they can start to deploy some of these capabilities, that's when the magic will start to happen. So from my perspective, back in the day, you know, when Microsoft came out with Office and it came out with Excel and Word and all this sort of stuff, the typing pool disappeared and we brought out Word. Everybody can use Word, everybody can use Excel. It's going to be the same with some of these project data analytics capabilities, and you're going to have some super users, and those super users will go deep in a certain area like machine learning, but everybody needs to be up to speed with these capabilities. And if you can't get up to speed with these capabilities, it's going to be these other people who's going to be nibbling into your job bit by bit. And then we'll lose critical mass and then it'll all start to fragment. So that's my take on it. And if you're interested in that, please reach out.
Thank you, Martin. I guess looking at the kind of, I think you called them the kind of data jockeys, but the question for yourself, Naomi, a post from Sharon. So do you think there's a concern or risk that having or gathering too much data will cloud the approach and final decision making by execs or project teams? If so, how do you identify the correct or appropriate data?
I think there is a risk in gathering too much data just because data gathering costs and putting data in costs. It doesn't, and so that we almost want to know what it is that we need to support decisions in order to actually work back from that to see where we're going to get to. So I don't think it's, I mean, it is the case as well that insights clouded the more decision you have, but maybe these kind of abilities to spot patterns that we're talking about here that are kind of automated will help us deal with huge arrays of data. I think there is a real question to ask ourselves, though, about what data really does support decisions and what is it as a minimum that we actually need to deliver projects better. And I would argue that we don't really understand or perhaps have sat down, discussed and articulated what it is that really supports effective project decision making. And surprise, surprise, you would not be surprised to know as a researcher, that's the question that we are just asking. We're asking for critical events. Think of a critical event in your project. What data or predictive capability would it have been good to have to actually be able to deal with this critical event better? So sorry, was it Elaine who was or Sharon? Sorry, can't remember the name of the person. Sharon, right. So I think Sharon is touching on a good thing here. I think, data costs to go. So we should always, even if it's not that much, we've got to keep it to a minimum. And I think we really need to ask ourselves very critical questions about what the decisions are in project delivery and how data needs to play a role in them in order to make sure that we are focusing in the right area. Thank you.
And thank you, Naomi. Hopefully that was useful, Karen. Please do come back if you've got a question for the back of that. The next one for yourself, Seb, is looking at that unconscious bias you mentioned. So looking at two questions, I'll try and group them together. So I guess first element of the question is there any insights you could give into how we can identify and correct data bias? And then the other one looks at how do you avoid training your AI models to be biased if you kind of have a biased input. Don't know if that was very clear.
It was clear. So starting with the second question. So we're looking at we're looking at how projects were planned to how they were executed. So if they were planned and there's evidence of bias in there, but you can see then from the delivery of that project what happened. And we're basing this obviously from the schedules to the lifespan of the project. You can learn what the trends in different activities are. So the machine learning algorithm is able to learn that. So it isn't learning off the biases, it's seeing the bias and obviously then seeing well actually this is what happened in the delivery. So and then it's learning from that set of data that it's seen. And then the first question I think was around the delivery of whether there's any patterns in unconscious bias. Is that right, Marius?
Exactly.
And it's a good question, and we've done a lot of, so every company we work with, we do a big report on their past schedules. So we will sit down and we'll say, right, well actually these are the identifications of different biases in your past schedules and so forth. So please feel free to reach out, because depending on who asked the question and where you're from, we may already have done one of those for you guys, and it kind of highlights the different areas that we see, and will obviously give you kind of a breakdown of each company's data from that standpoint.
Thank you.
Marius, can I come in on that question, please?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, because I wanted to just say what an excellent question that was, especially when you think, not looking at the sphere of projects and program delivery for using machine learning now, but look more widely. If we think about the debacle with A-levels last year, and the data scientist who I work with, Dr. Julia Brett-Schneider, wonderful woman, that there's bias in machine learning applications or AI applications in things like how we deal with criminals and recidivism in the USA, how people respond to criminals and deal with them, and you can see systemic racism within those bias. So bias within machine learning algorithms cannot be excluded because it's on the basis of the data that goes in and the questions that are asked about that data. Now, in the world of projects and programs, we're not in quite such a difficult or sensitive situation, but we're only learning on the things that we actually choose to actually put into that data. I mean, one of the things that might be the greatest predictor ever of project delivery success is whether or not the project manager in charge had blue eyes. But since we never record that data, we are never going to be able to pick that one up. Fortunately, I don't think that's actually relevant, you know, whether people have got blue or brown eyes. But what I think it means then, and it pertains a bit to the question that you were asking Martin earlier, that we need to keep a big dollop of common sense when we look at what machine learning produces for us or its predictive capabilities. Because I would take issue with Seb a bit. I don't think that computers are very intelligent at all. I just think they deal with loads of data and are actually quite stupid. And there is a role always to be an intelligent user. And I think if we're talking about the skills we need to give the people on this call, it's how to be an intelligent user of things like machine learning. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
Brilliant, thank you, Naomi. Next question for yourself, Martin. Just conscious of time, this will probably be our last question. So we haven't had a chance to answer yours, we will get in touch. But Martin, looking at kind of the upskilling side of things, and there's a question that's come in about, you know, it's a very specialist area, you know, looking at data at the moment. How, you know, what resources or, you know, what do we have available to upskill teams? And, you know, is it quite an expensive venture if a company does want to upskill their teams?
So in terms of upskilling, so Projecting Success run the Project Data Analytics Academy. It's all funded by the Apprenticeship Levy. So for most organisations, it's either free because you pay the levy, or it's 95% funded by government, so you just pay the other 5%. In terms of resources, right, so there's resources you'll need in terms of the capabilities to make sure that you can do this stuff. So a lot of that is focused around the Microsoft stack. So Power BI, Power Automate, all that sort of stuff, because most people like Microsoft land, but there's lots of other things like graph databases and things like Python as well, which is all freely available. So it's just making sure that you understand what capabilities you need based upon the functionality that you're looking to deploy and the benefits that you're looking to accrue. In terms of learning resources, there's plenty on YouTube as well. Come along to the meetups that we run. We get guest speakers in who talk about all sorts of things. So Dev's come along, so he's the Chief Executive of N-Plan. He's been every year for the last 3 or 4 years. So we get people come along and do some talks and try and inspire you on this stuff. And we do some deep dives as well into some of the technical stack and tell you how to use it. But if it's your bag and it's something you really want to get into, then have a chat with your boss and get involved in the Project Data Analytics Academy. I think it'll be right up your street. And I'll give you sort of plenty of practical experience to get in and start to deploy this stuff for real and to achieve some of the things that we've been doing at Hackathon. You know, it's really groundbreaking stuff. So thanks for the question, Maris. Great.
Thank you, Martin, and hopefully Ranveer, that answers your question as well. Just before I kind of say a final thank you to our guests, just to note this was a very kind of brief look at data and just delving into the first element of it. So we will be running sessions, and the APM host a lot of data focused events as well. So please do have a look at the APM website. But yeah, just to close off, a thank you to Naomi, Seb and Martin for joining us today and for giving us that insight. I hope it was useful and gave you a bit of a perspective. Again, if any questions for any of the guests, please do get in touch with the APM and they'll be sure to send it across to our guests. But yeah, just a final thank you for joining us and hopefully good afternoon.
Thanks, Marius. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, cheers, everybody. Thank you.